Imagine you are in your early 20s and walking down the street at night. Not alone, but with your partner. Your life couldn't be better right now. You have a great group of friends, a happy relationship, and some cool plans for the future. It's summer, and even though it's already dark, it's still pleasantly warm outside. On your way home, you decide to take a little detour to a local park. There's always something going on there. You chat with a few people and make some new acquaintances. And then, suddenly, everything changes. So quickly that you don't even have time to register what is happening. Namely, that someone suddenly and completely unprovoked attacks you. This is exactly what happened to a couple in England in August 2007. And only one of them will survive. Sophie Lancaster and Robert Maltby met in 2005 through mutual friends. They were just 18 and 19 years old at the time, and for both of them, it was love at first sight. They spent every free minute together. They see each other every day during the week and spend their weekends out and about with their mutual friends. Their friends describe them as soulmates. Sophie and Robert support each other in becoming the best they can be. They are similar and have the same interests, so they can truly share their entire lives with each other. Although they are both still teenagers when they meet, their relationship is very serious. Sophie's mother even secretly dreams that Robert will marry her daughter someday and that the two of them will perhaps become parents. In her free time, Sophie loves going to concerts with friends. She loves Marilyn Manson. Many of her friends also make music themselves, and when someone from their circle of friends plays a show somewhere, everyone is always there to support each other. Sophie got into the goth scene as a teenager. She was always shy as a child, but when she started to express her style, she really blossomed. Although she has occasionally been subjected to stupid comments at school or on the street about her piercings, her hair, or her clothes, Sophie has learned to brush them off. Unlike in the past, she doesn't care what others think of her. She feels comfortable as part of the alternative scene and has gained the self-confidence that she may have lacked in the past. Robert is also part of the scene, of course. Sophie and Robert have been living together in their first apartment in Bacup, Lancashire for a while now. It's a small town with only about 13,000 inhabitants in the north of England. The nearest large cities, Manchester and Leeds, are each a good hour's drive away. Bacup is a typical small town where everyone knows everyone else. Sophie, Robert, and their friends stand out. But as I said, they don't care much about that. They simply enjoy their youth and their large circle of friends and dream of the future. Until all that comes to an abrupt end in August 2007. On the evening of August 10th, Sophie and Robert are once again invited to a friend's house. They sit comfortably together with a few people, drink a little, listen to music, and talk. Sometime around midnight, however, the two decide to head home. Sophie and Robert live fairly centrally in Bacup, but they make a small detour to a gas station on their way. The two want to buy some new cigarettes. There, the couple encounters a group of young people, most of them girls. They think their style is cool and admire Sophie's hairstyle and piercings. The group of young people around the girls invites Sophie and Robert to come with them to Park Road. Stubble Lee Park is located nearby. They chat with the teenagers and the group moves on to the park and the skate park inside. This is a popular meeting place for young people in Bacup. There are already 5 other boys at the park. They make a few comments to Robert and Sophie. Mosier, emo, things like that. But the two are used to it. Sophie and Robert continue to chat with the others in a relaxed manner and even share their cigarettes with them. But then, from one moment to the next, the situation changes. Seemingly out of nowhere, the 5 boys who were already at the park become aggressive. Really aggressive. They start beating Robert and kicking him in the head. It all happens so fast that he barely has a moment to react. He loses consciousness immediately. Sophie is totally shocked, but she doesn't run away, unlike almost all the other teenagers who flee the park. Instead, she kneels next to her unconscious boyfriend and lays his head in her lap to protect him somehow. But the attackers pay no attention to this. They go after Sophie and suddenly kick her in the back, causing her to collapse next to Robert. Sophie also gets kicked in the head. Even when she is lying on the ground, the boys kick her head over and over again, and even jump on her. One of the girls, who was also in the park, calls 911 at 1:22 a.m. She says, "We need an ambulance at Bacup Park. This Mosier has just been beaten up because he's a Mosier." A Mosier is a term commonly used in England at the time to describe a person from the alternative scene. The expression comes from moshing, which is dancing in a mosh pit at concerts, as is common at rock and metal concerts in particular. By making the emergency call, the girl is also putting herself in danger, as she is still close to the attack. You can even hear the boys' voices in the background. The emergency call center stays connected to the teenage witness until the emergency services arrive. The recording clearly shows how shocked the girl is.
I can see the ambulance police right here. I can't see where it's going.
It will do, don't worry. Calm down for me.
It's coming, please.
I'm not going anywhere, but I need you to calm down. I need you to be able to tell the paramedics if there's anything, you can tell them, but you stay calm.
While the young couple lies seriously injured in the park, Ryan and Brandon make their escape. That same night, they brag about their actions to friends. They mockingly say, "There are 2 almost dead people lying in Bacup Park, in case your friends want to go and take a look." Meanwhile, a brave 16-year-old who has stayed in the park tries to help Sophie and Robert. He tries to stop their bleeding. The situation on the ground is confusing, partly because it is pitch dark in the park at night. What can be seen are 2 young people lying motionless on the ground. Both are in critical condition. Their faces are swollen from their injuries, and they are bleeding from their noses and ears. Robert has a brain hemorrhage. Sophie has severe injuries to the right side of her face. In addition, a piece of skin is missing from her head. It is suspected that their attackers ripped out her dreadlocks there. At first, it is not clear to the emergency services who the 2 seriously injured people are, but Robert's ID papers are found in his pockets. The information on them leads to his parents. They say that the woman with him must have been his girlfriend, Sophie. Meanwhile, Sophie's mother learns from her son that Sophie has been attacked. Sophie is shy and reserved. Her mother, Sylvia, can't think of anything that could have caused Sophie to get into a conflict. At first, Sylvia Lancaster is told that Sophie is okay. She's just in intensive care. At first, she is reassured. But then she begins to realize that Sophie is not okay at all if she is in intensive care. She drives to the hospital immediately, but Sophie and Robert are already in a coma. There are tubes and machines all around them. Their faces are still swollen. There are shoe marks on both sides of their heads. Nevertheless, Sylvia Lancaster wants to believe that Sophie will wake up soon. She spends as much time as possible in the hospital and thinks about the time after the attack, about how she can help Sophie heal physically and mentally. Meanwhile, the Lancaster police are under a lot of pressure, because the people who did this to Sophie and Robert are still walking free. The police must first find out who was in the park on the night of August 10th to 11th. Investigators are also conducting extensive door-to-door inquiries. For many young people in the city, the park is the hub of their lives. It is clear that some people must have witnessed the attack on Sophie and Robert. But the young people are probably afraid themselves and are disturbed by what they saw. Nevertheless, word gets around quickly in a small town. And so, by August 12th, the police already have some of the names of those involved. 3 young people are arrested by the police at their parents' addresses. 2 other teenagers then voluntarily come to the police station and turn themselves in. During questioning, 2 of the boys admit to having met Sophie and Robert in the park at night. The 2 also admit to hitting Robert, allegedly only once. The teenagers are apparently hoping that someone else will say too much and take most of the blame. 2 of the boys already have a history with the police. They are only 15 and 16 years old. Their names are Ryan Herberts and Brandon Harris. The 2 have beaten someone up before. For the person who was injured at the time, the matter ended relatively mildly, if you can say that. What was done to Robert and Sophie is a whole other dimension of violence. Given Ryan and Brandon's history, it is clear to the police that the 2 are capable of such attacks. While the 2 are being questioned, the police go to their homes. There, they secure items of clothing as evidence. There are obvious bloodstains on Ryan's pants. The pants and other items of clothing belonging to the boys are therefore immediately sent to the forensic department. Meanwhile, the witness statements are also becoming more concrete. The police have realized that the best way to talk to the teenagers hanging around in the park is to meet them on their level. That's why young police officers are specifically assigned to talk to the youths, and with success. A witness now admits that she saw Robert, at least, being beaten up. The attack was carried out by the same 5 boys who have already been taken into custody by the police. This statement means that the 5 teenagers are now being held on suspicion of aggravated assault. Because 3 of the 5 suspects have no previous convictions, they are allowed to go home on bail. Brothers Joseph and Danny Hume and a boy named Daniel Mallet are free again for the time being. Ryan and Brandon remain in a juvenile detention center, but the other 3 will also have to return to custody after a few days. In the meantime, more witnesses have come forward, and the forensic results are in. Previously, the evidence was only sufficient to support the charge of violence against Robert. Now, there is also enough information to officially charge the boys with grievous bodily harm against Sophie. The situation at the hospital also changes. After a week in a coma, Robert wakes up. From this point on, he has a long road to recovery ahead of him, both physically and mentally. He has massive memory gaps and cannot remember the incident. His girlfriend Sophie's condition remains critical, and unfortunately, her condition will not stabilize. After several days of intensive treatment, the doctors have to inform the family that Sophie will never regain consciousness. Her head injuries are simply too severe. Her brain shows no activity. 13 days after the attack, Sophie's family decides to let the 20-year-old go. The life support machines are turned off. Sophie Lancaster finally falls asleep, surrounded by her family. And with that, the charges against the teenagers also change. It is no longer just a case of grievous bodily harm, but now also murder. When Robert sees Sophie's coffin for the first time, his first thought is that it is too small. No life as full as Sophie's should just fit into a wooden box, he says. Sophie Lancaster's funeral is a big event, not only for her surviving boyfriend Robert and other family members and friends. Media interest in the case is huge at the time. So much so that television crews are there to film the funeral. Robert later recalls that the whole thing was difficult for him to bear, not only because of the obvious, but also because so many people at the funeral didn't really know Sophie. Robert is not only struggling with his own recovery and the loss of Sophie. In a rare interview, it also seems as if he is struggling with life itself.
Because from what we've heard, Sophie was trying to protect you.
Oh yes, yeah. That's it. In my mind, I just really wish she just legged it, just got out of there and wait until they'd left and come back. But I wish she'd left me to die, if I'm to be honest. So.
In the meantime, the clothing of two of the suspects has been examined. Blood from both Sophie and Robert was found on the inside of Ryan Herbert's pant leg. Blood from both victims was also found under the soles of his sneakers. Such quantities of blood can only occur if one is standing directly in a pool of blood or stepping directly on the wound. During a phone call from prison to his mother, Ryan admits to her that he is partly responsible for Sophie's death. When Ryan and Brandon are driven to an interrogation, they sit together in the police car. They do not know that the investigators have bugged the car. As a result, Ryan is recorded talking about how the two of them kicked Sophie's head like a soccer ball. In the meantime, the three other suspects have also made comprehensive statements. The Hume brothers and Daniel have said that they were involved in the attack on Robert, but not in the attack on Sophie. They say that Brandon Harris and, above all, Ryan Herbert were responsible. Being potentially charged with murder is quite different from being charged with aggravated assault. Perhaps that is why the three are shifting the blame for Sophie's death onto Ryan and Brandon. However, their statements make them important witnesses for the prosecution. This provides the necessary evidence to charge the five boys. They are accused of the murder of Sophie Lancaster. Ryan's defense attorneys are still trying to mitigate the charges and plead manslaughter. They justify this by arguing that Ryan is autistic and, because he is on the spectrum, he does not have the cognitive patterns to commit murder. Not only is this nonsense in itself, but a test conducted by a renowned psychologist in this field also reveals that Ryan is not autistic at all. Accordingly, this motion is withdrawn. At the trial, the five defendants quickly admit to the aggravated assault on Robert. On the first day of the trial, Ryan Herbert admits to killing Sophie. This has an impact on the rest of the trial, as the murder charges against three of the young men are subsequently withdrawn. The brothers, Joseph and Danny Hume, and Daniel Mallet, are sentenced to prison terms of between 4 and 6 years for aggravated assault only. The attack on Sophie and the attack on Robert are now considered two separate attacks. Ryan Herbert and Brandon Harris remain the main perpetrators of Sophie's murder. Both are sentenced to life imprisonment. Ryan will have to serve at least 15 years and 6 months. Brandon, 18 years. Although the evidence against Brandon is somewhat weaker, he receives the longer minimum sentence because Ryan confessed to the crime. Sophie's relatives are simply relieved that the young woman's violent death has been recognized as murder. In 2012, one of the two convicts sends a letter to the survivor, Robert Maltby. It is supposed to be a kind of apology, but to Robert, the letter simply reads like an attempt by someone who wants to present himself in a good light in order to possibly get a shorter prison sentence. In 2022, Ryan Herbert is actually released for good behavior. He is said to have made outstanding progress in prison. During his imprisonment, he participated in rehabilitation measures, studied, and even found a job. He is subject to certain conditions, such as a restricted movement radius and a designated place of residence, but otherwise, Ryan Herbert is free again. Brandon Harris is still in prison at the time of this recording. The last thing we heard about him was that he allegedly attacked an employee of the psychiatric ward while in prison in 2013. He had previously been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. There has been no news since then. Theoretically, however, he could file a request for release in the near future. His 18 years are almost up. In the period after Sophie's funeral and the verdict, the park in Bacup becomes a place of mourning. Sophie's parents had a maple tree planted at the spot where Sophie and Robert were attacked, in memory of their daughter. Finally, it is important to talk about one of the most relevant reasons in this case, namely, the motive. Why were Sophie and Robert attacked so brutally? Unfortunately, this question will not be answered during the trial. For Sophie's mother, Sylvia, it is clear why her daughter and her boyfriend were beaten up. Because they belonged to the alternative scene. Because they looked and were different from others their age. Anyone who dresses and behaves outside the norm will be familiar with this. Strange looks, perhaps even giggles, and in the worst case, insults or even assaults. The prosecution also presented this case in court. Sophie and Robert were not targeted because of something they said or did, but because they looked and dressed differently. This is also based on the fact that several of the witnesses say that the attackers repeatedly wrote things like emo or mosher during their attack. Sophie's mother, Sylvia, decides that her daughter should not have died in vain. She founds the Sophie Foundation. This is also an acronym for Stamp Out Prejudice, Hatred, and Intolerance Everywhere. The organization promotes tolerance and acceptance of others and is committed to helping people in society who are different. As the name suggests, the goal is to combat prejudice, hatred, and intolerance. The foundation has developed educational programs for every age group and visits elementary schools, secondary schools, colleges, and universities. The programs include workshops, presentations, and Q&A sessions on the topics of youth crime and being different. The organization also has information stands at trade fairs, concerts, and festivals. At Bloodstock, a large metal festival in England, a stage was named after the murdered Sophie Lancaster. To this day, the Sophie Lancaster stage is set up at Bloodstock every year. This is despite the fact that the medium-sized festival could earn much more money by naming the stage after a sponsor. Beyond that, the memory of Sophie also has a place in metal and alternative culture. The Sophie Lancaster case is particularly well known in the British scene, and fans and bands alike regularly remember Sophie. Well-known bands such as Delane, Cradle of Filth, and Arch Enemy have even contributed songs to a charity album for the foundation. However, there are also those who take a more critical view of the whole thing. When talking about true crime, it is most important to give the victims a voice if possible. And in this case, that is possible, as Robert Maltby survived the attack on himself and his girlfriend. And he views the events somewhat differently. 10 years after the attack on him and Sophie, Robert agrees to an interview. In 2017, he still lives with his parents, just 10 minutes away from the park where he and his girlfriend were attacked. In an interview with The Guardian, he says that he sees the connections made between Sophie's style and the crimes differently. He does not believe that the attack on him and Sophie was a hate crime. Robert says, "It was always said that Sophie Lancaster was murdered because she was a goth. No, she wasn't. She was murdered because a couple of assholes murdered her. Why can't we ask what led them to want to murder someone, and not what led someone to be murdered?" In 2017, Robert also agreed to participate in a documentary about the case. It was produced by the British broadcaster BBC Three and is called Murdered for Being Different. The film also reenacted the attack on Sophie and Robert. In the film version, the two are wearing clothes that identify them as members of the goth scene, or at least a related subculture. Lots of leather, dark clothing. Robert finds this portrayal strange. On the night of the attack, he himself was wearing normal, everyday clothes, blue jeans and a green hoodie. Robert says that the only things about him and Sophie that might have looked unusual that evening were their piercings and Sophie's hair, which she had braided at the time. For Robert, the focus on his and Sophie's supposed appearances feels like a form of victim blaming. Because, according to Robert, the issue is actually a completely different, structurally deep-rooted problem. Life in these poor areas has not evolved. There is still discontent, stagnation. These areas are still forgotten, and forgotten people feel, well, that can lead to nihilism. I never tried to demonize the attackers because in many ways, they were victims themselves. Regardless of whether you agree with Robert or not, he is the one who was there. He is the one to whom these terrible things happened, and his words definitely show that he has dealt with what happened to him in a profound way, and that he has worked through a lot. Physically, Robert has fully recovered from the assault. Mentally, of course, it's a different story. He was dependent on antidepressants for years. But he managed to complete his studies and now works as an illustrator. Despite his nuanced opinion, he has also been a strong supporter of the Sophie Lancaster Foundation. In 2010, he organized an exhibition featuring several of his paintings inspired by Sophie. The proceeds from the exhibition went to the foundation. Even though Robert views the goth and alternative scene differently than Sophie's mother, it is undeniable that Sylvia Lancaster's work set the ball rolling. It has led to a major debate about the prejudgment of subcultures. The case even led to a petition to broaden the definition of hate crime. A hate crime is a criminal offense in which the victim was specifically targeted because of their actual or perceived membership in a social group. For example, because of their religion, origin, skin color, political views, sexual orientation, or disability. Discussions about Sophie's murder drew attention to the fact that members of subcultures can also be victims of such hate crimes. Since April 2013, the Manchester police have been recording this in exactly the same way. Crimes against goths and other alternative groups are officially classified as hate crimes. This also makes it clear in a legal sense that members of these subcultures, unfortunately, still have to contend with prejudice and hostility. On the 16th anniversary of Sophie's death, the Sophie Foundation is publishing the results of a survey it conducted itself. The survey questioned people who are part of a subculture. According to the survey, 80% of respondents said they experience hate crime regularly or at least occasionally. 73% of respondents have never reported hate crimes against them, and 27% of respondents said that the hatred they were exposed to had caused them to have self-harming thoughts. I believe that if you are not part of a subculture or are not visibly part of it, you have no idea what that can entail. Especially if you are part of a tolerant circle of friends. You can quickly get the feeling that any prejudices against punks, emos, or whoever have been eliminated. However, the figures from the survey suggest that this is not the case at all. That's why it's important to be aware of this reality and go through the world with an open mind, even if that means showing moral courage when necessary. Just like the girl in the park who called the emergency services, or the young people who tried to stop Sophie and Robert's bleeding. Above all, we must all work together to ensure that cases like Sophie Lancaster's are never repeated. Regardless of whether it is suspected to be a hate crime, in an ideal world, there would be no place for this, and Sophie Lancaster would still be alive today. Sadly, Sophie Lancaster's mother, Sylvia, has also passed away after running the foundation in honor of her daughter for 15 years. However, the foundation remains active and is active throughout the UK. If you feel comfortable talking about it, I would be interested to know whether any of you have had bad experiences because of your appearance, the scene you belong to, or similar reasons, or whether you have friends who have been treated with hostility because of this. As I said before, I think many people who are not in this situation do not realize what a big problem it can really be. Maybe it helps to talk about it and listen to each other. I'd love to hear from you. Other than that, there's not much else to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're watching this video, and hope to see you again in the next one. Until then, Bye, everyone.